Now I would like to ask Hannes to remain on the stage for the panel discussion, and also Sotiris and Gernot can join him there. And also I would like to invite a man focused on investments in growth stage tech companies, acting like investment director at Runa Capital, a $200 million technology-focused venture capital firm. Welcome, Dmitry Galperin. And also, I'm passionate about digital education, the CEO of Ibis Capital, an investment and advisory company specialized in media and education technologies. Charles McIntyre. And a final warm welcome to our moderator, Benjamin Vedren Quoque, operating partner at Ibis Capital.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm here to moderate your panel about the collaborative economy, and we'll be talking mostly about space and education. So it seems unrelated, but it actually is. And I think the reason is if you think about it, those two sectors and the innovation and disruption happening into those two sectors are about to drive change for probably centuries in our economies and daily lives. That's the first reason. The second reason is that when you've got sectors innovating quickly, it's very important to get a very strong ecosystem for the sector to flourish. And having a strong ecosystem means having collaboration between partners of this ecosystem. And especially if you do that in a European context where our markets are relatively fragmented, we have different decision makers, politics. I think collaboration in those two sectors is of quintessential importance. And I probably start with questions on space and with you, Gernot. From a human perspective, space is something very remote. We feel it's space for a sector of specialists. And I was just wondering how you bring space down to earth, into our daily lives, into our economies, and how can we be, as a community or as an ecosystem, involved in what you do?
Yeah, I think in fact we are already using space a lot more than we think of. I mean, space has become an integral part of our infrastructure, and I'm not just talking about a weather prediction with a satellite image in the TV news on the evening before. I'm not talking about GPS or so. I'm talking about that part of our economy is space-based already. Think of telecommunication satellites, think of satellite TV and so on. So what we see here is that like 95% of the space activities which are ongoing are hidden in the background and we don't realize them. I'm sure that everybody in the audience has already today used at least half a dozen of space technologies without even noticing. But I think the most important point to take note of is that we always have this impression that we are here on Earth and there's space and sci-fi up there. No, we are an integral part of this. You are all astronauts of the spaceship Earth. With responsibilities. If you don't take care of your spaceship, it will hurt you. And the same things are happening on a grand scale here on this planet. Now, I think it's important to notice that we are part of space. Almost every single atom in your body was once forged in the center of a star in a supernova about more than 5 billion years ago. You are stardust listening to somebody talking about stardust right now. You are, by definition, an integral part of the biggest thing ever conceivable, the universe, which makes you great.
And so let's talk a little bit about collaboration. I mean, you're heading the Austrian Space Agency in a European context. How does that work? I mean, I have this vision that US space is working well, Chinese, Russian, but what about in the European context? Is there collaboration really or not?
As always in Europe, things are a little bit more complex. If you have main players who are pretty much independent and some people have designated the European Space Agency as a group, like compared to the bus, where you have like more than 20 first row seats with a wheel. Everybody got a wheel, and wherever the most common denominator goes, that's the region, the direction where the bus goes. And that has been compared to European Union and the Space Agency. Now, however, I think we found a way to specialize in a complementary manner. That means in Austria, for example, working on spacesuits. Nobody else is doing this in Europe right now. Other countries like France are concentrating on Earth observation and launcher programs, and so on and so forth. I think in the end, what it gives us is a competitive tool set in a very competitive global market, like rocket launchers, like remote sensing and so on, where we as Europeans have learned how to negotiate since the very beginning of the European Space Agency, which is 40 years ago or so. And I think we are now at a capability level that even if we would love to do it, we could even go to Mars as Europeans ourselves. The average European, and thank you very much for this, pays about the equivalent of one fast food menu per year, per person. Thank you very much for that. If we would double that, yeah, and it would be very healthy for us maybe, we could afford a human Mars mission just from Europe out. Yeah? And of course, never forget, space is also a platform for international neutral cooperation. Space station activities are a fever thermometer of geopolitics as well. And it's also a wonderful enabler for nations to work together on a neutral ground for the benefit of all mankind.
Okay. So space is Europe is well positioned, that's what you're saying.
Definitely.
How is it in education? Charles, you are one of the most active advisors and investors in European EdTech. How would you characterize the European EdTech ecosystem?
Thank you, Benjamin. I mean, I think what's interesting is the parallels to what you're talking about collaboration. I think the issue in Europe is about fragmentation, and really how do we bring that fragmentation together? Because, as I've talked before, is the size of the market from an academic perspective. Europe has more students than the US, and yet we invest about 1/10 of what the US invests into education technology. But the reason for that is more to do with how do we collaborate and bring together groups of people with interests in the sector, because we're not short of entrepreneurs in Europe in education technology. We have over 3,000 entrepreneurs across Europe who are looking and building businesses in this sector. So when I look at Europe, what I see is a huge opportunity. I see a range of different businesses that are trying to develop and adjust to the markets, but because of the way that we're set up in Europe, it makes the barriers that we have to break down a little bit higher than they are in other parts of the world. Now, to overcome that, we need to share information and knowledge, and that is done by coming together in conferences like this. We also run a conference in EdTech in London, which again is about bringing together people to try and share and break down barriers. And that, I think, is really the key, and it's got a lot of parallels, it seems to me, in terms of what we're talking about collaboration in space and in other technology-based industries.
I'd like to extend the question to Dmitry. Dmitry, you are a venture capitalist. What's your view on European EdTech, and can you explain why so little venture capitalist money is invested in education technology in Europe compared to US, but also compared to Asia?
Yeah, I think that indeed the European market is pretty fragmented, and that's pretty much an issue. But nevertheless, what makes EdTech interesting for investment, it's still a huge market. I mean, it's a mass market where even in Europe there are hundreds, millions of people who are willing to get educated, who are actually getting educated, and who are paying for education in some sort, for courses or whatever. And then there are, well, billions of people in the world who do not have the access for the education. So it makes the future opportunities for the EdTech even bigger than, focusing on the markets like Europe or US alone, right? And then there are other fundamental issues with the current education, which makes it now set for disruption, like books. They need to be printed, they need to be stored somewhere, right? It's hugely inefficient. Then there are classrooms, they're brick and mortar. They have limited capacity, right? Again, it's very inefficient. And then it makes the current price point, the current price tag for quality education pretty high, right? And as a result, basically any company in the online education is set to have high margins because it does not have all that inefficiencies, right? And people are prepared to pay for education. So, and this preparedness of people to pay for education makes Europe an attractive market for a VC. And well, apparently, United States is a more attractive in that way, right? So education is traditionally paid there. So that's the VC view on that. As a result, we're getting to pretty high ARPU, like average revenue per user in the companies, and the high scaling and the high network effect. So that's pretty interesting market in my view. And we have 6 or 7 investments in edtech, but not only in Europe, so in different countries, out of 40 companies portfolio. So we're pretty exposed to the sector.
Okay, well, you're one of the few VCs investing in edtech in Europe then. I'd like to get the view of the entrepreneurs here, Sotiris and Hannes. I mean, you're both competing in a global edtech market. Just to take the example of Iversity, Iversity, as you know, is a MOOC. They are very large US competitors. I mean, how do you think, do you think you have a chance to win that battle with the Coursera's and the Udemy and all the large US MOOC? And, I'm taking a parallel of, if you look at, in the media industry, is there any European YouTube? Is there any European Netflix? Yes, there is Spotify, which is probably the counterexample of, European large startup can make it. But do you think you have a chance to win that battle, or do you see more yourself as a European player and try to defend this?
I don't think that battle really exists, and I think the analogies are not fitting because YouTube, for example, is a pure B2C platform play, whereas here this always has a B2B component. Coursera is working with partners and is relying on these partners, and so are we. And I think there are plenty of very, very high quality brands in Europe that you can work with to build education as a service businesses. I mean, if you take Germany, the obvious thing that comes to mind is the automobile industry, but also logistics, machine tools, and then you could go into other areas, life sciences, but also in business. I think there are specific European approaches, and enabling universities as well as companies in these different fields to build education as a service businesses, to me is a very obvious opportunity that is not so easily seized out of Silicon Valley. Okay.
So Thierry, what's your view on this?
Well, I would like to take a pragmatic approach into the question, and I have 3 dimensions. One dimension is the amount of edtech companies. Another dimension is the amount of people receiving online training. And in the middle, it's the time. So at this point of time, we might have 3,000 edtech companies around the globe, but we also have around 10 to 15 million users receiving online courses. So that means that basically until the 6 billion people being truly connected and receiving online training on a daily basis, we have a long time to go. So that means that basically our American friends, they are inflating a little bit the facts by brainwashing with a very nice marketing. We are the biggest and we are the greatest and all these kind of things. So I'm not afraid at all about the competition. Competition is only good for the end consumer or human being. The market is huge. And I think that basically if our values are correct, because education is a holy industry, it's like water, it's like electricity. Education should be a universal right, should not be something that we exploit like the trees or our rivers. We should protect it. So I think that in the long run, with the right values, with the right service, and with the right approach, there will be 3, 4 companies that they will train the 6 billion people, and Eliademy will be one of those 4 companies. I can tell you about it. I can feel it.
Yeah, Dmitry?
Yeah, actually I have an example here of a pretty successful European company competing globally in edtech space. It's a company called Brainly. They're from Krakow, from Poland. They have originally started in Poland, and then Russia was their second market, and then Turkey. And on these 3 markets, I think they're close to covering all the school-age children, helping each other with the homework. And then there is Indonesia, where they're like growing exponentially. And then there are 20 other markets where they have launched and growing, US including, right? This is, I think this is a perfect example of European, well, in a sense, ed tech company competing globally and competing very successfully. And they just recently raised a round from General Catalyst in the US. Well, quite a huge round. We also participated in that round. So yeah, that's and their audience scale is like 40 million monthly users. So it's huge.
Charles?
So I just wanted to add that there's one thing that we tend to forget, which is that the fragmentation that we talked about earlier in Europe is actually can be turned to a big advantage for European companies, because we're used to putting out and developing businesses that work in multicultural, different nation states and different environments. And that is something that other markets like the US is not used to expanding into. And that means that I think there are competitive advantages to the flexibility that European businesses have and how they adapt to this market. So the example on Brainly I think is interesting is how it's picked out different markets and gone into those and built market share, not on a grand scale, but market by market, and built its scale that way.
We have 4 minutes left, so I have one question for all of you. Space education are very important sectors for Europe. They'll probably drive the future of our nation, the future of our economies. If you were in charge, heading Europe, what is the single things you would change to make collaboration in your sector better and to improve the chances of Europe to lead? And I'll start maybe with you, Gernot.
I think societies thrive on challenges. And now I think I have a little bit of a biased view coming from the space sector and saying, well, let's go to Mars. Of course, that's a self-interest as well here. But I argue for that because these kind of activities bring out the best and the brightest in us as humans. And I think, especially in Europe, we have a very old and very proud tradition of exploring. And exploring means learning new things. Not just about the worlds out there, but also reflecting back on us and getting a new concept of our home world, so to say. So I think those kind of challenges, from the technological point of view, from the space point of view, are like a kind of a Rosetta Stone for unlocking dreams as yet undreamed.
Okay, very good. Charles, your view on this? What is the single things you will do?
So I think we talk about tradition, as you said, in terms of exploring. We also have a great tradition in education and learning. And I think one of the big challenges is the fact that we need to invest in education because the competitiveness of our nation states is dependent on creating a flexible and knowledgeable workforce for the future. Now, to do that in a fragmented environment means that we have to create collaboration, which we've talked about, and there's a role for supranational involvements like the EU to influence that. So the one thing that I would really ask you for, if I was in charge from that perspective, is to create a framework that develops the online education environment into a framework which we can all benefit in separately. And what I mean by that is helping with things like accreditation at a supranational level, helping create investment structures to bring in capital to invest in these new technologies. And that needs a kickstart in Europe from those type of bodies, because Europe tends to be very poor at backing entrepreneurs. It's bad at it just because the capital is not designed to be applied at that end of the market. So it needs a bit of a push. So that's what I would do.
Dmitry?
Well, I'm probably not in the right position to get advices to EU, given that I'm
Why
the
not?
only one on the stage from a different country. But in general, I think that European legislation lacks attractiveness for the VC capital compared to British law, and that's in my view in my venture capitalist view the main thing. Otherwise, from my experience, the less governments are willing to regulate or change something in industry, the more benefit the industry gets from that. Just let it grow.
Sotiris, if you could knock at the door of the president of EU, what would you ask for? I know you can do that. Yeah. Maybe you have done it already, but
I think that basically there were really good points already, so I have to find a new one. And I think that our politicians, they are training the public opinion, the society. And at this point of time today, I see that their training practices, they are not good. Like taking an example of Greece, we terrorize a whole nation in order for the rest of us to accept that basically we need to cut down public spending and we need to transform our societies. And we have the example of Greece and says, look, if you don't follow what I say, look what has happened to Greece, it will happen to you. So that is a bad, terrible approach. We need teachers, the politicians, to become role models of a new society. We need to bring the entrepreneurs into becoming stars, role models to influence and inspire our kids. We don't need terror in order to get motivated. We need something more inspirational. And if I was able to knock down the door to Mr. Juncker, I would have said exactly that to him.
Okay. Hannes, how do we create more EdTech European champion like Iversity?
Well, one of the differences I observe looking at the American players in the space is that oftentimes there is a very senior board of very accomplished individuals that's behind these companies, opening doors and helping out. And I feel that more people in leadership positions in Europe could take on that kind of role and not just say, oh, it would be great if everyone could be a little bit more entrepreneurial, but if they themselves would actually help in getting entrepreneurial projects off the ground, not because they have shares, not because they're being paid to do it, but simply because it makes sense and they can do it, and it's not that much of an effort oftentimes to just write that introduction, make that call, and bring things together, because that's one of the key differences that I feel when I'm in the US, that people are like, okay, what do you do? How can I help? And that question I hear very rarely in Europe.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time. Obviously, we could continue for ages talking about this. It's very interesting. That was just a conversation starter, and keep the conversation going. Thank you very much.